Sure. Thanks a lot, Tom. And look, it's very nice to be with all of you. I see a lot of familiar names, but also names that I don't know. So happy to introduce myself to you. As Tom mentioned, I had the opportunity and the fortune to be the PennDOT secretary in the Wolf administration from 2015 till I came here. A lot of people like to joke on my timing to come to the 6th largest transit agency right before a global pandemic. Not everybody can line that up the right way. But look, it is a wonderful time to be here. And what has been always important to me, and Tom mentioned it as well, as a county commissioner before, I've worked for civil engineering firms, environmental engineering firms, planning commissions, as well as economic development corporations, but always have been interested in how people connect with one another. You know, I say this all the time. People think I'm in the transportation business, but really in the people business. And have always, again, had the fortune to have jobs that help improve the quality of life for people at the local level. I was a township supervisor as well, and the county level, last position at the state level, and now here at the regional level. And in a real way where I get to talk to our customers, I get to be part of our communities that we serve, and get to work with all the great city partners, so many of who I see are represented here today with us, with the business community, and with so many on all sides of the public equation and the private equation on how we are going to recover from this pandemic and this really, really tough year that we've had. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention SEPTA has been impacted in a real way by this pandemic. We've lost 10 employees due to COVID. We've had over 1,000 employees test positive. The good news on that is we've had over 80% of our employees fully recover and come back to work full time. And we anticipate that all of the remaining employees who are out dealing with the virus right now will come back and fully recover. But it has been, you know, a year like no other, I think, for all of us. We have had to, you know, reduce our system to the bare bones. We've had thousands of frontline workers who had no choice but to come into work every day with a lot of anxiety, with fear that they could bring the virus home to those who they share their household with, but nonetheless showed up every single day to keep this region moving, to keep essential workers with the ability to get to the work that they needed to do, essential work, whether it was life-saving at our hospitals and institutions or at other, I would say, necessary and essential jobs that allowed us all to function in the safest and healthiest way possible over the last year, kept the shelves on our grocery stores stocked, kept facilities cleaned, made sure that people were fed who had to be in their offices all day, and all the other essential work that needed to happen. SEPTA was a big, you know, a big player there. We were proud to do it. And I hope it has elevated. I feel like it has, where SEPTA was taken for granted in this region in many ways. I feel that people really see the need and the service that we provide. And I feel, you know, I'm very heartened by the relationships and our partnerships over the last year as well, and the opportunities that are ahead of us. And I have no doubt that with all of us working together, SEPTA will be stronger as we recover from this pandemic, as well as our economy and as well as our neighborhoods that we serve. And so I just wanted to give a quick background of some of the ups and downs. And I definitely want to talk about equity. I want to talk about diversity and inclusion and what we're doing to work together moving forward before we get to our questions as well. So in addition to all of the surprises in the last year, never did I think I'd be at a point where I asked our customers not to use us, but that is exactly what we had to do. We had to send people home who had never worked from home before. We had to figure out a way to function and again get those essential trips there. We shrunk our system. We're slowly adding back to our system. In fact, today in an hour, our operating budget will be released to the public so people can see what our plans are, how we are utilizing the much needed federal funding that came our way. And we need it because we are losing $1 million a day, and we have been losing $1 million a day, I would say since April, well, for a year. And so we have to figure out how do we not only survive, but how are we going to thrive as we all come out of this pandemic together. Very grateful for that federal funding, but I do just want to remind everybody it's a one-time infusion. And while we are using it to keeping our operations going, we have to figure out a way that's sustainable well beyond when that money will run out. And every scenario we're running right now, which shows how our ridership may grow, and it's very incremental and it's very slow at the current moment. Just so everyone knows, we're somewhere between 35 and 40% of our riders on our buses, our subways, our trolleys. We're somewhere between 10 and 15%. We had one day where we were almost 20 on our regional rail lines, but it's very slow to come back. Obviously, our regional rail riders have more options for the most part than others. They can work from home. They have flex schedules. They have other means of transportation. And so we do know part of our existence coming out of this is that we do need to win our riders back, and we do need to be the mobility of choice here, and we do need to support our economic partners and our businesses here to make sure that they can return to the office, they can recover from the pandemic in the way that they need to. We hear it and we get it that every employer survey, when they send it out, I don't think there has been an exception. All of the employers that we've spoken to, the top two reasons and the top two things that employees want to see before they come back to the office. Number one is vaccine availability, and we're seeing that now. And number two is that SEPTA is safe and that they can utilize SEPTA because the way that the greater Philadelphia region is built is extremely dense, and the way that it can function is with a high functioning mass transit agency like SEPTA. So I just wanted to paint that picture. You know, we have done enhanced cleanings. We are working on getting the information out. Our air filtration system is excellent, by the way. Every 2 to 3 minutes, air is refreshed on all of our vehicles, our platforms, and our facilities. We have a certification level that is higher than what most people are trying to attain to prove to their clients where they are. We're getting all that information out there as well. We are safe. I see in the chat here to talk about our vulnerable population. And so we know that we can manage the cleanliness levels that are required to keep everyone safe from the virus. Where we have had challenges is, you know, the societal issues around us, and that is the challenges we see from our vulnerable population, those experiencing homelessness, drug addiction, mental health challenges. This pandemic has hit them very hard, and you know, SEPTA is downstream from all of their safety nets when they are not working well, when other organizations have had to scale back in hours in their service and how they provide their services. SEPTA basically becomes a shelter area, and a shelter area being run by a transit agency is not what this vulnerable population needs, nor how we are going to help them. And so I'm very proud of what we've been able to do in the last few months. This will become more discussed, but as you may have already seen, Somerset, our Somerset station, which is right next to Kensington, became a large problem, a safety issue, both for our employees as well as our customers. And this is an issue that we saw throughout the system, but definitely with an intense focus here. And so our riders were having to step over, you know, human waste, step over people passed out who were taking drugs. They had to see people injecting themselves, you know, near our stations, and it was really not a good situation. What we did do is we had to close down the station, and that was for a variety of reasons. Somerset has a very tight footprint, and we needed to get in safely to do the necessary work, including getting our elevators back up and running, which had been damaged by urine and needles, as well as other objects that were being and collected into the mechanical pits underneath the elevators, and we had to get in there and fix them. The good news is we put together an internal team here, and we have partnered with businesses, with church groups and religious organizations, with civic organizations. In fact, today at 1 o'clock, I'll be presenting at a public hearing that is around this topic that has been held by Councilwoman Sanchez, who represents the Kensington area. And we'll be talking about our partnerships with the city as well. At yesterday's board meeting, we discussed with our board how we want more stations to look like Somerset. And that is something that someone at SEPTA, especially the GM, has never said, because Somerset has always been, I don't know what the opposite of the role model station is, but that is what Somerset was. But what we have done now is we have reopened it. We have gotten the elevators back up and running. We have figured out a way to partner with community members. We are paying them to be attendants to help us keep the platform safe as well. We have partnered not only with our own law enforcement, but with a security team. And we are working with others to make sure that everyone who enters our system there feels safe and feels that they can ride and get to where they need to go. We're now moving to Allegheny. We're going to move to Tioga. We have issues in our center city, you know, with the lack of pedestrian traffic on our system. It has definitely welcomed some unwelcome behavior. And the good news is that a few months ago, I didn't know where we were going, and if we had the right resources, where we would spend the money and what we would do. And that has changed. And so now we have a very good model. We're expanding on it. We're figuring it out how it can be sustainable. And I'm really looking forward to the next few months of relaying this information on what we have learned. I'm already being contacted by my peers throughout the country. They are very much excited about what we are doing here at SEPTA, so that they can also replicate the model that we've figured out here and helping people. I should say the best part of it is that we have teams of law enforcement and social service experts that include mental health experts, it includes social services, it includes substance abuse experts, and it includes community participation, where we are connecting people with the treatment that they need. We are making sure that they know where the resources are. Of course, they don't always accept it, but we are making it easy for them to do so, and then to hopefully get to temporary transitional housing and permanent housing so they can get back on their feet. This is not just a program about moving people over. This is a program about helping them. And so what I want to leave you with before we go and listen to a lot of other questions, and I'm happy to go into depth on any question that you may have, is that just in the first few days at Somerset, we made over 60 connections with this new model. We got 14 people to accept temporary and respite treatment, and we moved 2 people into a more permanent type of treatment. And I know that sounds, 60, we got 2, but trust me, in this field, which I am learning more and more about, as we figure out how we can be most helpful, those are good numbers. And if we can get people into the treatment they need when they are ready, and this window is so small, by the way, if they have drugs in their system, if there's fentanyl in their system, there's only a small window on where they can accept the treatment. There's only a small window where they will actually want the treatment. And so you have to ask them over and over again. But the fact that we made these connections in such a short amount of time, I am extremely excited for how we're going to work together as a community and help the Philadelphia region on this huge, challenging societal issue, working together, and which will help all of us. So I will end with that one, but I'm happy to get into funding. I'm happy to get into other equity issues. I'm happy to get into our capital and our operating budget, which is being released to the public, operating today, capital on Monday, of our challenges ahead of us and what we are looking at. And while we talked about my timing coming here before the pandemic, I just want to let you all know I am extremely happy to be here at this time. It's very exciting as we're all working together and figuring out how we recover together. And we know that we're all going to be stronger than ever before. And very happy to be working with Yasha and his team of advocates. We believe in the same things. We don't always believe in the same way to go about them. And Yasha pushes us in really good and productive ways and asks for answers that the public deserves. And I really appreciate the relationship that we have and working with them. So I'm happy to share the stage with Yasha and all of you today.
That's great. Yasha, you're up, please.
Well, thank you so much, Tom, and thank you so much, Leslie, for those kind words. And I was going to preface, just my introduction to, who we are at Transit Forward Philadelphia with, Leslie and her team have been really instrumental in working with us. And I'm sure folks here on the call are wondering, what's a transit advocacy coalition doing, in a conversation around SEPTA? Isn't SEPTA the one in power? Don't they control kind of everything? And but the thing is, it's been great. It's been wonderful actually working with Leslie and her team. And as she kind of reiterated, she's very excited to be in this position. And I know that we over at Transit Forward Philadelphia are extremely grateful and extremely excited to have a GM that is dedicated to equity and that is dedicated to working with us advocates, to speaking with us and understanding the role that we kind of play. And I did just wanted to, kind of elaborate a little bit on what Leslie was talking about in terms of Somerset Station and kind of the challenges that station was having. Public transit, issues are not just strictly in a silo, right? Public transit is an economic issue. It is a social health issue. It is a racial justice issue. It is an economic justice issue. So the fact that SEPTA has taken, the proactive steps to handle things like poverty and homelessness, that surround SEPTA stations, right, is very admirable. And I just wanted to, say thank you to SEPTA for doing that, because that is something that is beyond necessarily the scope of a transit agency, but it definitely intersects and intertwines the workings of a transit agency. So we've been, really happy to see, what their response has been to the closing of that station. And like Leslie said, we can kind of go into more details about that. But my name is Yasha Zarrinkelk, and I'm the coalition manager and organizer with Transit Forward Philadelphia. We're a coalition of Philadelphia-based organizations, essentially trying to amplify the voices of riders in support of a transit network that is the preferred mode of transportation in greater Philadelphia, essentially everywhere that SEPTA operates. And we believe in a region that's connected by a safe, accessible, and sustainable transit network that really allows people, communities, and businesses to thrive. We started off literally right around the same time that kind of Leslie came into her general manager role at SEPTA. We had like a public launch where we had over about 200 folks come in, where we had a panel that had Leslie, Chris Pahalski over at the city, and council member Gim. We started with about 8 core organizations, ranging from environmental justice groups to, like, for example, AARP Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Association of Community Development Corporations, labor unions like SEIU 32BJ. And since then, we've expanded to about over 24 organizations. And that includes a various group kind of working with like the Nationality Services Center, a kind of immigrant and resettlement organization. We're working with a lot of like centers around the advocacy and rights and interests of the elderly. And we're also working with a lot of disability organizations as well. The main focus of our coalition is essentially to, one, play this kind of inside-outside game with SEPTA, where we have very strong and working relationships with folks over at SEPTA, but we also want to, maybe see them, push them a little bit further, right? And at the same time, too, support them in things that maybe is out of the scope or out of maybe their hands, and where they need advocates to kind of be doing that work, whether that's around statewide transit funding, or kind of pushing for trolley modernization, right? And trying to get city council members, or the city, or the state, or the federal government for that matter, on board trying to support SEPTA. One example of kind of some of the work we've done so far, we've partnered with organizations nationally, other kind of transit advocacy groups across the whole country that's been organized. It's kind of a national campaign for transit justice. As Leslie was mentioned, she came into this position during the pandemic. Ridership immediately fell. And as Jeff was mentioning in the chat, using a ridership revenue-based model is going to really impact funding when it comes to a transit agency. So one of the things that our group was doing was really trying to go to our federal government and asking our legislators, Senator Casey and Senator Toomey, to stand on the floor and really push for transit funding, within the two stimulus packages. And we are very, very thankful and very, very grateful to see the funding that has come through to our transit agency, specifically, in Philadelphia and with SEPTA, but across the state, because transit accessibility is huge. It's a huge component of getting people to jobs, getting people to healthcare, getting people to school, getting people to work. So those are just kind of some of the ways and kind of some of the sort of the tactics that we kind of, like to support SEPTA in, making them the best system that they can be. Like as Leslie said, we have the same goal, and that's providing, accessible, safe, and sustainable public transit to everyone in the region. And we love kind of working together with the agency and kind of putting together what's sort of the best sort of strategy in achieving that and making that happen. Our coalition is kind of open to all and any organizations. Our groups aren't just made up of groups that are necessarily doing specifically public transit work. Kind of as I was mentioning earlier, public transit is a very intersectional issue. So we have groups like the Sustainable Business Network, part of our coalition, labor unions, for example, and we're actually trying to bring in, a bunch of different kind of folks that are just beyond the, normal sort of like Bicycle Coalition of Greater Philadelphia, or groups that are sort of beyond the normal like transportation advocacy scene. And to folks who may be kind of new to the transit advocacy scene, and Tom, I'm sure we'll maybe kind of get into this in the questions and things like that. Kind of happy to explain, what the role, a transit advocacy coalition does, and kind of what benefits come out of that, and kind of what we've seen across the country with other organizations and things like that. But overall, we're really, really happy to be here and have this discussion with everyone here. And like Leslie said, I'm happy to kind of answer any questions about some of the specific work that we're doing, as well as ways that folks can kind of get involved in kind of continuing our working relationship with SEPTA and kind of, pushing things over the line. I'll just give a kind of brief overview of some of the main things we're working on. One of them is making a push for a statewide transit funding sustainable source. As folks may or may not be aware, but our current funding system or programs in which public transit is funded is not necessarily most sustainable. And in July of 2022, the way that the Pennsylvania Turnpike provides funding to public transit agencies across the state. The amount of money that's going to go to public transit agencies is going to enormously diminish. So one thing that we're doing right now is trying to work with organizations across the state and trying to put a lot of pressure on our legislators to get them to try and find a solution to this. We've seen Governor Wolf kind of already taking proactive steps in creating the Transportation Revenues Options Commission. And so we're really, really happy to see that kind of work being done. Another sort of campaign we're working on, SEPTA is undertaking a redesign of their entire bus network. And we've been kind of mobilizing riders and organizing folks to be able to participate in this. Other thing that we're working on is trying to make a push to get funding for trolley modernization. Trolley mod is a huge kind of project here in Philadelphia. And we really need our legislators up in Harrisburg to be pushing to provide funding to make that project happen. And with that, I'll just kind of open it up, leave it for Tom if folks want to answer questions.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that, everybody. That's the risks of Zoom life. I'm going to start off since I'm leading this. We do have lots of questions, and I'm going to ask them, but I get to start with this one actually. The last year, I think that there was a shift to free transfers. That is, I can imagine, has a lot of implications for SEPTA's budget, but also for the equity question. Access is very important, and that was a very important move, and that was justified for that purpose. But I'm very interested what you see the current status of the transfers, free transfers. How do you see that going forward, especially given what you are seeing with the budget and the turnpike revenues? Is that all going to work out together?
Sure. Transfers, I'm really proud of the board for voting in the middle of a pandemic to move forward on our fare restructuring elements that reduced the costs, that made our system easier to use, but not only easier to use, more cost effective and time effective, especially for our riders in our most disadvantaged neighborhoods. Part of what we were doing, and we're happy that is what we are seeing. So for instance, a rider can get on Nicetown and can make it into Center City or into a job opportunity and save 20 minutes each way. And the board also decided not to move forward on any cost-effective issue that would add cost or make our system harder to use. We had already seen that flex schedules and how people use our system was going to change. And so obviously that's been accelerated during the pandemic, but we already saw some use away from morning commutes and evening commutes, and more toward what we call lifestyle use, people doing their errands, people going about their daily lives. Using our system. So we were already moving toward that, and we'd been talking about it before the pandemic. I'm really proud again that the board decided to move ahead with all of those issues. Our fare restructuring was based on equity. Where are our riders, who needs us, and what is it that we need to do. We've made that a focus, including with our partnerships with the Black Doctors COVID-19 Consortium, with getting testing out to our employees and to our customers, with getting vaccines out to our employees and to our customers, and to making sure that we provide opportunities for everybody. SEPTA overall connects people to opportunities. For me, that is one of the most important things that we do. We have 1 million people that live within a half mile of a SEPTA stop. And our expansion project, the KOP Rail, which I strongly believe in, is going to connect the 3 largest transportation centers here in greater Philadelphia area. So that way people will be able to access opportunities in Center City, University City, and King of Prussia, which is the fastest growing area in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And so, we're very proud about that. We also have a very difficult, financial picture where we're losing $1 million a day. We're grateful to get the federal infusion that we have on our operating side. But as Yasha started to talk about, and what Tom just referenced as well, is our capital side is definitely in a precarious position, to say the least. And that is because how money comes to transit right now, and the majority of our money does come from state funders. And state funders, by the way, who have never ridden SEPTA, who may have never even visited Greater Philadelphia, and who don't care about transit, nor does it have anything to do with what they see as their mission as a legislator, will be voting on and will be part of this decision of how funding goes forward. So I'm thrilled to be a member of the Governor's Transportation Revenue Options Committee that Yasha referred to. I'm thrilled to be able to represent mass transit on that committee, as well as the Greater Philadelphia area, and figuring out what does our funding look like going forward. Does it change altogether? What is it that we need? My strong ask of the state right now is to allow the funding as it comes right now and as it is written in Act 44. This is the legislation that Yasha was referring to that ends next year. Right now, the money, the way that it comes down is the Turnpike borrows the money, they issue debt, they then take the debt that they've issued, they pay PennDOT, and PennDOT is required through another piece of legislation, Act 89, to use that money for transit. That's how $450 million gets raised every year, and that's how $450 million goes through PennDOT and is spent on transit. And by the way, there are 53 transit agencies across the Commonwealth. It is not just SEPTA. And so what is supposed to happen is the Turnpike should be relieved of issuing so much debt. However, they will be paying that debt off for quite some time. That's a talk for another time of the financial health of the Turnpike. But it then gets transferred to the vehicle sales tax. Right now, we all pay anywhere from 6 to 8% if we own a vehicle on vehicle sales tax if we are purchasing a new vehicle. 6% for the rest of the Commonwealth. If you reside in Philadelphia, you are paying 8%. And that money through city legislation goes to other causes. That money is going to the general fund, being spent on very good things, on health and human service initiatives, on education initiatives, on prison needs, on all of the good things that state government provides. And so the big fear is that the legislators who don't know about SEPTA, maybe don't care about SEPTA, will decide not to go through with that provision in Act 44 and stop it. And so the money will not come to transit after June of next year. And that will leave us all with a huge hole, especially here at SEPTA. I want you all to understand our capital budget is half of what the other legacy agencies are. That's Chicago, that's Boston, that's DC, definitely New York and New Jersey as well. They all have capital budgets well over $1 billion, and ours is 600 million to 700 million on any given year. And so we're already falling behind on this legacy system. We're grateful to have it, but we need to invest in it in ways moving forward. So that's where the funding discussion is right now. And we need to make our voices heard, what we need to do to expand to make sure that our system continues to grow and meet the needs of what people need now from our system. But we also need help. What we are asking the state for is to let that money transfer to the vehicle sales tax, because then we as SEPTA can borrow against it and make our capital dollars larger than what they are now and closer to what other systems have. Right now, we can't borrow the money because the way that it is raised is the Turnpike is issuing debt. So they're borrowing on the money, and you can't borrow on money twice. However, the vehicle sales tax, we can borrow on. And I don't mean to be getting into the weeds to bore anybody on this call, but it is an important thing to understand. We're not asking the state for more money for transit, although we could use more money. What we're asking is for it to come from a different source so that we can borrow on it and help to meet the needs that we have here.
I'm going to just jump in for a second and apologize for what's happening in the chat. I'm trying to listen to this interesting conversation and control this at the same time. Quite a feat. I don't know Zoom enough to know how to turn off the chat, so I just ask you to sort of bear with that. I'm going to ask any of you to. There's a variety of questions there. I'm going to go to a couple of them there, reading over this other stuff in the chat. And then I can open it up to anyone who wants to actually ask the question themselves. But let me actually start with one of them that came in from, has to do with vaccinations. Where is SEPTA getting the employees vaccinated? And are you coordinating with other large employers in terms of getting return to offices and setting your rules and your protocols for return to work?
Yeah.
Or to the extent that that's gonna, I mean, obviously folks have been at work already, but
Sure. So in fact, today, just this week, I participated in a discussion in DC. That is one of the good things about Zoom. I could be in DC and then the next minute I could be over at a meeting in City Hall, which is kind of nice. And we were talking about vaccinations. I'm very proud. We are far ahead. In fact, we may be further ahead than any other transit agency right now. Every single employee who works for SEPTA has been offered vaccine. And that's because of our partnership with our hospitals that we work very closely with the city who we work very closely with, and with helping FEMA set up their vaccination sites. Not only has every single employee, and we have 50% of our employees have been vaccinated. We are working on encouraging others to be vaccinated. We have others signed up now. It's an educational process. We are working with outside partners. We've teamed with athletes. Merrill Reese, Mike Quick from the Eagles have done videos for us. We have gotten Black doctors to talk to our frontline workers. And there are a lot of reasons that some people do not want the vaccination right now. And so we are trying to answer their questions and give them the information they need so that they can make that decision for themselves. The good news is we are seeing an increase in those who want to be vaccinated. We hope to get to 70%. That's the goal. That's the goal that has been set in front of us to reach immunity overall, and we want to do our part here at SEPTA. I think we're going to exceed that goal by the time we're done here, but we're working on it right now. The other thing that we are doing is we're helping get people to vaccinations if they need it. So we helped with the city in picking the sites that FEMA is running, both at the convention center and at Esperanza. Obviously, our entire system is available to anybody. All seniors ride our system for free at all times. And so they can get to vaccinations on our system for free. We're also offering our paratransit and our CCT services for free. Anyone who needs that to get to a vaccination site. And we are also helping the National Guard and other federal agencies are helping run those sites get to and from the vaccination sites. So we're working very closely with all those organizations, getting people to where they need to be. We know that the more people that get vaccinated, the quicker we can all recover and protect our own health and our community. So we're working very hard in those areas.
Yasha, do you have any thoughts on the vaccination protocols and plan that they have set out?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been great that SEPTA has been providing free CCT service, and there's essentially all of SEPTA's routes are providing access to the designated vaccination centers. So I think that's a huge component of, getting folks vaccinated is providing them the accessible transportation to those centers. So as a transit forward affiliate, our transit advocacy coalition has, I think, definitely applauded SEPTA in that action. I also did want to speak to the question of transfers, Tom, that you raised originally, just real quick to Leslie. During SEPTA's fair restructuring plan, they eliminated the transfer fee for riders between either, buses and trolleys and or riding from one bus to another. And that's a huge step and a huge leap in SEPTA's kind of, commitment to equity, which Leslie has been very outspoken about and has been awesome. And it's going to be something too that's going to be very, very key to one, getting, as Leslie said, regaining the trust of riders and getting riders back onto transit, especially as SEPTA undertakes this bus network redesign. In order for our bus system to be fully effective, to be kind of fully accessible, and to use the bus system not necessarily just as like a silo form of public transit, but to be connected to the trolleys, to the subways, right, is getting rid of that transfer fee. In addition to getting the bus network to being the most effective and efficient network that it can be, by penalizing riders who need to transfer from one bus but may actually get to their destination faster, or do not have to wait for their bus as long, because they are able to make multiple transfers, is also going to be a key component of that. And so we're happy to see SEPTA taking that step forward and kind of eliminating that transfer penalty. And I think one thing that our group is really interested in working with SEPTA is to try and maybe get folks more than one free transfer, especially when it comes to the bus network redesign, so that our routes are as most efficient as possible and are moving as much as possible. And I think too, with the COVID-19 pandemic, having more buses running through the system so that buses aren't overcrowded and folks don't feel, afraid of riding, a bus with too many people on it, and it can wait for the next bus and know that they're not going to be waiting for so long. So we're really, really excited for that, and really, really happy to be working with SEPTA on that. And then I just wanted to add too, on the federal kind of, I'm sorry, not the federal, the statewide transit funding stuff. Jeff dropped in the chat, the sort of the issue with, the kind of the Pennsylvania approach is using debt to fund operations, and actually, using a fair revenue based model to fund a ton of our transit. I think that's a really, really important and key component to all of this, and in an ongoing conversation that we as advocates need to be having with our legislators to kind of try and implement a sustainable source of transit funding, and allowing either the our state legislation to not one, restrict the ability to expand local transit, but also allow that there are statewide funding sources that are dedicated to public transit, and that transit funding is not necessarily just taken from the PA General Fund. There's a ton of different mechanisms out there that the Transportation Revenues Options Commission has laid out. And I think that there are some that are, really, really progressive and can really, really benefit our riders without affecting those who rely on public transit the most.
Jeff did have a couple questions. Jeff, should I unmute you? You want to ask some of those questions, or you can unmute yourself?
Thanks. Leslie, this is great stuff, and I've heard you talk a lot about the intervention strategies you're doing, and I just want to make sure that people understand how innovative they are. Living in on sort of northern Liberties, very close to the Girard station, like it's amazing how many vulnerable people are sort of using SEPTA as a shelter. And I've only been on SEPTA a few times since the pandemic because I've been working from home, but I've found the riding experience, not terribly unpleasant, but certainly there are a lot more people who seem in need of help there. So I applaud you guys for, working with Center City District and others to try and get that done. I guess my broader question is like, what have you learned from a lot of us, said the pandemic just sort of like exposed existing inequities and inequalities. What have you learned from the way in which SEPTA raises revenue due to the pandemic? Because it occurs to me that, there are some users of SEPTA or institutions that really rely on SEPTA, like center city businesses. Do you feel like there may be a different revenue model we can come up with that makes the biggest beneficiaries pay more?
Yeah, I do. And, I don't want anyone tweeting all of this stuff out because there will be a time to discuss it, and I don't want to get ahead of myself here. But because of the way it's structured, and it's structured everywhere in every state, by the way, and our board is structured differently than other, it's not a consistent model. So you learn what you can from other peer agencies and other states and how they're done, and then see what's relevant to you. It is unusual, right, that 50% of our funding comes from state legislators, and that a very small portion comes from the areas that utilize the system. In the other agencies that I mentioned to you, the governors have a large appointed number of positions on their board. That's not the case here at SEPTA. It's run by counties and it's run by local. So it's very different. And so you have to look at all of the different elements that you have to work with. I think here it would make the most sense, and it's why I appreciate what PennDOT has put forward in their P3 tolling plan on how to pay for transportation moving forward. For those of you who are not aware of it, they've selected over half a dozen bridges throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to be tolled. And when they are tolled, they will pay for the maintenance and the rehab and the reconstruction work of those assets. But what is left after they pay for those can be distributed in the areas where the tolls are paid. So for instance, there is a toll on I-95, and initially people might think, well, a toll on I-95, who wants that? We want to be able to ride on I-95 without paying anything. But anybody who has made the trip up the coast on I-95 knows you pay a toll, let's just say from DC, right? You pay a toll in Maryland, you pay a toll in Delaware, you pay tolls in New York, you pay tolls in Connecticut. Pennsylvania is the only state that we don't, which means that our funding of I-95, which here in Pennsylvania, by the way, is built totally on structure, not to get in the engineering weeds here. However, it's a big bridge basically, which means the maintenance and the reconstruction, and we all live through it right now. It's been under construction for 20 years, and it's going to be under construction for another 20, because it is the way that it was built. Is a tough engineering challenge to keep that in the state of good repair that it needs to be of the heavy traffic volumes that it sees. So I just put that out there. So every other state gets to collect money to help them pay for that interstate, but we don't. And so that particular interstate, which is the most expensive here in Pennsylvania, is pardon my language here, but sucking the resources from all the other transportation projects. Now, look, for those of us who live in this region, we're happy to see it, because I-95 is a vital part of how we live, how we get our goods, how the economy functions here. But it's taking away from other uses of that money. If that tolling plan goes forward, I'm a huge proponent for it. That means that the tolls that would be collected as people used I-95 in Pennsylvania would help pay for that project, would allow PennDOT to use some of that money in other areas that are very much needed. And the money that gets collected above and beyond that, and it would in a short time, could go to transit, could go to trails, could go to other mobility options, could help freight corridors, could help so many things that we all rely on for our daily lives that are transportation related. It would be a huge game changer here. And unfortunately, there's some trouble in Harrisburg on getting it passed. It's definitely still in play. It's definitely still being discussed, but just want people to understand we are trying to be innovative here. We are trying to think of different ways. And how great would it be that the money that is raised here in southeastern Pennsylvania stays in southeastern Pennsylvania? We are the biggest contributor to money that goes to Harrisburg and gets redistributed to the 66 other counties, right? Other than Philadelphia. But I would even, to be fair, I would count the 5 counties here together, the SEPTA service area. That money should stay in this area. So 60 other counties get, 61 get other, get the money. We send more to Harrisburg than we get back. And that would change that model. That way, what gets raised here stays here and gets invested here and helps the economy here. And I think we need to look at that type of a model. And they have that in Chicago. They have it in DC, in parts of DC. They have it in Boston. And it would really help us make the right investments here. So we're taking.
At what level does that decision have to be made? Is that a state decision? Is that a
state
federal decision?
Yeah. Well, again, to get into the weeds here, and I don't want to take off for some of the other good questions here. I'll touch on it a little bit. If you want me to go more in the weeds, I will. So I also had the honor to lead the public-private transportation board, the P3 board for the governor while I was secretary. So this is a P3 project. And the way that P3 projects move forward, it does not require a vote. That's one of the beauties of funding transportation projects in this way. But it can, if it gets a veto vote, it kills it. So it only requires people to vote against it, not for it, which is a lot easier to do for an elected official. They don't have to put the vote up for it. They just have to remain silent. But again, that's getting into the weeds of politics for those of us who have been close to it. And so that's where that sits right now.
I wonder if we just jump in and answer a couple of the other questions really
Sure.
quickly. We got a few minutes left. There were questions about some specific route extensions and station openings. There's a question about even the service to a new Amazon warehouse on Elmwood.
That's about, so our trolley modernization, which is making our entire trolley system, which is a very important part of our network here, accessible. Right now you have to climb upstairs to get to the trolley. So anyone where that's a challenge, anyone with disabilities, anyone with a stroller, anybody with a walker, anybody with a cane who cannot go up steps to get onto a vehicle cannot access our trolley system. It's a big problem. It's one of our oldest parts of our system. And so that property acquisition was part of how we were moving this modernization project forward. It was one of the ways we were moving it forward. And unfortunately, that property acquisition did not go as we would have liked it. It was perfectly situated to help us move that project forward because Amazon was also interested in the site, even through an eminent domain type of process. The price tag of that piece of property increased exponentially and would require us to spend so much money on that piece of property, it wouldn't allow us to advance other elements of the trolley modernization project. So it really priced it out of our, of a good selection. The good news is we have a plan B, we have a plan C, we have a plan D. Now each plan as you go down, I'm telling you, that was our plan A and that was my preference. However, because of things out of our control, that's no longer a viable option. We're now working on our plan B. I would even say we're now to plan C, trying to figure that out. There's also a reason why sunshine law rules when you have to be transparent about things and when you should, and I'm a big advocate of being transparent. There are 3 elements where you don't need to be transparent, and it's because it can really impact you negatively. It's personnel issues, it's litigation issues, and it's real estate issues. So I know people want us to be completely transparent about other real estate that we are looking at. But if we are, we run the risk of exactly what happened to us on this other site with Amazon coming in. As soon as a developer knows that SEPTA is interested in a particular area, other interests could go in there to bid the price up, if SEPTA's interested in it, maybe I'm interested in it. And so we have to get to a certain point where we can talk about it. I know people are frustrated by that. But again, we don't want it to hurt our chances. So then we have to go to, plan D, E and F. But we are committed to trolley modernization, and people will see that in our capital plan, which gets released to the public on Monday. It's going to go forward.
And we have just 1 minute left. Is there anything you can tell us very quickly about the extension to King of Prussia, to the Navy Yard, any of those service lines?
Okay, I can tell you, yeah.
If there's anything about that.
And Yasha, please, I'll take 30 seconds. You can take the other 30 seconds on this one. King of Prussia rail extension is vital to SEPTA's future. It connects us to the third largest employment center here. It provides opportunities to our riders. It helps those businesses expand and locate there. And it is what SEPTA needs to be. We are an old legacy system, and this is what this area truly needs. So we firmly believe in that. We are working with different options, on the Navy Yard. I'm just going to stop there because I don't want to take up Yasha's time. But just because times are tough right now doesn't mean we don't think about our future and what we need to be for future generations here. Go ahead, Yasha.
Thank you, Leslie. Yeah, to me, I think one sort of invisible extension that's really going to have is when this bus network redesign is going to be implemented. I think it's going to provide a lot of access to a lot of different job centers and locations that are maybe not necessarily getting the strongest service. So I'm not necessarily going to speak to KOP or the Navy Yard. I think those are things that are more in SEPTA's wheelhouse. But I think with the bus network redesign, that's something that we're following closely, and is going to actually be able to provide not only faster but more frequent and reliable service to parts of the city that were necessarily maybe not seeing the strongest of service. That's not to say that that's not the intention of SEPTA or anything like that, but that's the whole point of why SEPTA is undertaking this redesign, is to really be able to provide that strong and robust bus network that SEPTA has established so far.
All right, we are at time. I appreciate this very much, and on behalf of the whole board, the committee, thank you for your time, and thank you for all your questions. There are some of them that came in I just didn't have time to get to. And there's a question, will an edited version of the session be available online? Yes, it's on our to-do list.
And Tom, if you want to send, or if anybody had questions that didn't get answered, please let Tom know, and we'll get our staff to respond. Look, we really appreciate, and I will say, just with the pandemic and the challenges ahead of us, every idea is on the table. We are rethinking everything that we do here, and we want to support everybody as we come out of this pandemic. So I really appreciate it. There's been a lot of good ideas that I've written down through this chat. And we'll have other opportunities, as well as working with Yasha's group to figure out what transportation and transit should be in this region.
And I just want to echo what Leslie said there too. I dropped my email in the chat if folks have any questions about our coalition, how to get involved, ways in which we're working with SEPTA, and things that you see us, we should be working on too. Please don't hesitate or feel free to reach out to me there. And I just want to say thank you so much to everyone for coming, and apologize for any sort of inappropriate things that were heard and said in today's meeting. That's just uncalled for, and so I want to apologize too.
Yeah, again, apologies. And yeah, so keep your eyes open for the next email and other announcements for us. And that's great. Have a great weekend, everybody.